In a world that's quite fragmented and quite challenging, I feel like there's a lot of unity in the impact investing community. I feel like blended finance is really our ticket to help unlock and to enable more impact investing.
Welcome everyone to Impact Investing Musings, a podcast series where we delve into the ever-evolving world of impact investing. We aim to connect, educate, and share knowledge to drive capital into impact. I'm Vikas Arora, Chief of Impact Investing and Blended Finance at AVPN. In this episode, we hear from Elizabeth, a pioneering leader in the impact economy. With GSG Impact, she prompts a fundamental rethink of the financial markets through an extensive global community of national partners. Without further ado, let us begin.
Welcome, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for joining us today. To kick us off, can you share with us how you got started on this journey of impact?
I spent 20 years at the Inter-American Development Bank working on Latin American finance. And way back in 2006, when philanthropy was sort of moving into business philanthropy were coming together, where the number of the tech giants in the United States, the Google, the Gates, the Meteor, were sort of placing capital to both invest and to donate. I started to work on business at the base of the pyramid, new business models where you needed to have a commercial and a social return before impact investing was an asset class. But started back in 2006 with sort of working with companies to help them invest some of their capital into business models that had measurable social and commercial returns, and then eventually led the impact investing portfolio at the Inter-American Development Bank. And then joined the United Nations briefly to develop standards to help investors allocate capital towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Then joined the US government and led policy at the US International Development Finance Corporation, and then jumped to GSG a year ago.
And for those not yet familiar, can you share a little more about GSG Impact?
GSG Impact is a global community of connected local partners. We were created in 2015. We were a successor to the G8 Social Impact Task Force when the UK chaired the G8 in 2013. And our mission is really to build impact economies across the globe. How do you put into place the right incentives, the right infrastructure for impact capital to flow? So we do this by working to create and then to accredit through a rather rigorous process with our board, and then to support local impact investing organizations, which we call national partners. So today, GSG Impact is comprised of 43 national partners covering 48 countries. And more than half of our national partners are now in emerging markets, developing economies. We have here in Asia 12 and a special task force in Taiwan. So we are building out the market here in Asia. But we work more upstream. Our job is to really, when we say build impact economies, how do you ensure that impact is embedded into policy, into business, into investment decision-making more specifically. So our job is really working on those policy levers to unlock impact capital.
Working with over 43 national partners is no small feat. What secret do you have to be able to collaborate with so many different partners?
For me, and I think for our community, having strong local leadership is really the key to enabling the infrastructure, the incentives, the frameworks that need to be in place. That advocacy is so important. And really understanding the environment in which you're working. And so for us, I think it's really ensuring that we're building strong local impact investing organizations that have that depth, breadth, and reach in their communities and really understand their environments and dynamics.
As you've been building this impact economy, what's one of the biggest trends you've seen as impact investing has been moving from niche to a mainstream?
Yeah, so much of impact investing is really focused on the supply of capital. How do you connect investors to enterprises? How do you place some of that liquidity into impactful funds or vehicles? Yet, I think to really move impact from, they say, from the margins to the mainstream. I feel that the work we're doing now to unlock policy is critical to enable impact capital. And we're starting to see quite specifically across our network, a single policy win can unlock billions in impact capital. So we've been quite focused on how do you really enable domestic sources of capital to put those to work for impact. And here in Asia, there's tremendous domestic assets. You have savings through pensions, there's sovereign wealth, there are family offices, yet very little of that money is actually directed to impact. And in part, that's because there isn't really the regulatory regime, the incentive structures in place. So this is where our role comes in. Our local partners, our national partners, are really working to advocate for regime change. What do you need to do to unlock a domestic pension to put that to work for an impact vehicle? And hopefully that will be true across a number of the markets here in Asia, as well as worldwide.
You're right that there's a lot of untapped potential and capital here in Asia. I find there's a lot of traditional family offices that are now starting to look at impact investing. What's a good entry point for them to start?
I mean, communication around impact is always difficult, but it's really communicating around the right incentives. What are the right incentives if you want to make that investment? I think investors want to be sure. We've been focused quite a bit in parts of our organization on disclosure and impact standards to have that certainty so the investor really understands that their capital really will have a measurable impact. And then there's the conversation around vehicles. What do we need to do to enable, for instance, a local pension to be able to invest in alternative assets such as an impact fund? And what's the argument that we need to make with the local pension commission to make that happen? So these are the kinds of conversations that we're having with policymakers and with different asset owners and managers to think a little bit outside of the box.
Have you seen a shift in mindset or an increase in interest for private sector solutions?
It's been interesting with geopolitics and a lot of fragmentation across the globe with limited overseas development assistance. There's, I think, quite a lot of interest today on private solutions and thereby on impact investing, which offers a value proposition that transcends all sorts of political and other divides. And so I feel like there is quite a lot of interest right now. And then when you're listening to different policymakers, you'll hear that, Africa needs capital and Africa has capital. But the challenge is, how do you unlock those domestic sources of capital? And that's where I think the conversation is happening. I think the work that we've been doing upstream to sort of bring that to the attention of both asset owners, asset managers, and policymakers, that we really need to think about regulation. What is it that we can do to put insurance or to put pensions or to put sovereign wealth vehicles to work for impact? So I do think there's been a bit of a shift, and the more we can do to educate, the better off we all are.
So education, advocacy, these are critical. What other strategies are critical to make this shift?
I think part of our secret sauce is that we're very global, but we're also local. So sort of understanding where the Dutch pension system has been so impactful and so has invested more than $70 billion now in impact. So those examples that we can take from our community and bring them to different localities has been quite exciting to see this global to local and local to global.
In all this work you do, what's your hope for the future?
Assets under management that are impact are quite small today. And I hope within the next 10 years, it's 100-fold. There should be so much more money chasing impact investments. So yeah, my hope is that we sort of stay the course on the policy framework. We work on those incentives. We work on the transparency to make sure that we have measurable, understood disclosure and standards, and that we have a lot of demonstration effect by unlocking domestic sources of capital.
But how do you ensure that the capital is truly allocated towards impact solutions?
I do think that's where impact standards and transparency come in, is to be able to measure, to manage, to disclose one day on the impact that you're having. And I think sustaining that rigor is super important to be legitimate in the space.
And especially as blended finance evolves, the scrutiny around its legitimacy grows with it. How do you see the future of blended finance?
I mean, every transaction that we work on in the impact investing space is blended in some capacity. Sort of having different return profiles has become so important to attract some of the more skeptical institutional investors. So I feel like blended finance is really our ticket to help unlock and to enable more impact investing. And it's a structuring approach that's had a lot of success, particularly on the environmental, on the climate side. But I think I think pretty much every impact deal will be blended in some capacity to be able to attract and to enable, different return profiles that are important for different investors.
It hasn't been an easy time for impact organizations over the last few years. What gives you hope?
I find this community of 43 national partners, I find the GSG Impact community incredibly dynamic and hopeful. I feel like we sort of, in our network, are the leaders of impact investing sort of throughout the globe. And I do find the whole conversation super hopeful. In a world that's quite fragmented and quite challenging, I feel like there's a lot of unity in the impact investing community and among this global group of national partners. So it gives me hope.